the city of St. Louis, you're listening to the Don't Push Pause podcast with your hosts, Justin Johnson and Lindsay Reber.
Welcome to the podcast.
Welcome back, everybody.
How you doing, Lindsay?
I'm doing okay. How about you?
Pretty good.
Yeah.
I'm glad we're coming off of Alien here, which is probably the most well-known movie that we've done for the podcast. And
that's a fun one. I love Alien so much.
I'm kind of glad we're switching gears, going for a comedy, and one that I think is a really has become quite a cult film.
It was one that I knew growing up, but I never really thought was... I thought it was just one of those movies that I knew because of the actors involved with it. But the more, when you and I were talking about doing this, I started asking people about it, and people were like, oh, I love that movie. The movie we're talking about is A Fish Called Wanda.
And so that'll be our main feature. We've also got our picks of the week.
What's yours this time?
This week, connected via Jamie Lee Curtis, I chose early 80s movie with a huge cast of not real well-knowns at the time, but now they're all big household names, and that's Grandview, U.S.A.
I'm so glad. I haven't seen this, but I'm planning on watching the copy you're letting me borrow.
Yeah. It's not great, but it's worth a look.
It's worth watching.
Just for the cast alone. Yeah.
Okay.
What was your pick?
My pick is connected to A Fish Called Wanda via Kevin Kline, and that is Soap Dish.
Soap Dish.
Mm-hmm.
I remember you loaning me that one. It was a good time.
Yeah. It wasn't one of your favorites.
It was one of my favorites, but
I love this movie.
It was a good time.
Yeah.
So those are our picks of the week, and as always, we'll round things out with our Murray moment. So A Fish Called Wanda, a couple of the reasons why we chose this one. Number one, I think both of us kind of grew up with this movie. This is also one, too, that I kind of had forgotten a little bit about. I hadn't seen it in quite a while before we picked this. So it's been fun to revisit. And it plays actually funnier than I remember. And I remember that Kevin Kline had won the Oscar for
Best Supporting
Actor. Yeah. Watching the movie, I mean, he is absolutely fantastic.
One thing about this is that while he is completely fantastic, and you almost want to say steals the show, it's really evenly matched with everybody else involved. And you've got Jamie Lee Curtis and John Cleese and Michael Palin. It's very even. Everyone is giving 100%, over 100%.
Yeah. Incredible cast.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of cast, that's one of the things we'll be talking about.
Mm-hmm.
What are some other things we're gonna discuss here today?
Probably some differences between, maybe not differences between, but American and British comedy, and how this movie is a good mixture of both of those things kind of converging together.
We've got some behind the scenes information. A lot of time and work went into this movie, and sort of a passion project for John Cleese. So we'll talk about that.
We're also going to talk about the animal violence involved in this. And Justin, you and I are both big animal lovers. So it is funny to me that this movie does contain some animal violence.
Yeah.
But we'll talk about that a little bit.
And I know we had mentioned this when we were thinking about doing this movie, that Jamie Lee Curtis gets turned on by people speaking another language, and so I Googled if there was like a language fetish, or there is, but nothing came up. But a couple people said that they had what they felt was like possibly a linguistics fetish, where they said they did get turned on by people speaking in other languages. But as far as I could comb, not the deepest, darkest areas of the internet, but just surface level stuff, I didn't quite find anything. But so I think this was like completely created as an original concept for this movie.
Yeah.
Just thought I'd throw that in there. Some early trivia.
So we're going to talk about...
I did some research this week as well.
Some sexual fetish research. Great. I'm really glad that you did that, Justin. We'll talk also about how this movie... we love our genre blending on this podcast. And this one blends so many different things together. So we'll probably hit on that. And man, one thing I remember a lot as a kid was this movie seemed really dirty to me. It seemed like a super sexy movie. And as an adult, like I get why I felt that way, but it's so silly.
It is silly, but it has I would say it's like a mild sex comedy.
I mean, we've already talked about sexual fetishes, so
yeah.
I guess I wasn't off.
But we'll save that for second part of our discussion. So, all right. Well, before we get into our first clip, Lindsay, can you bring us up to date? What is A Fish Called Wanda about? It's kind of an intricate plot.
It is an intricate plot. It focuses on 4 people who are in on a bank robbery together. They successfully rob a bank. And then the rest of the movie is about them kind of one by one double crossing each other after the main guy was ratted out by 2 of the partners. It is a really intricate plot. And it's not like it's hard to follow or anything like that, but it is a heist movie about stolen loot.
One of the few times you could mention the genre comedy crime caper.
Crime caper.
Because normally if you mention those words, I'd be like, I don't know.
I'm not into that, actually.
But this one really delivers.
Not really into capers.
Yeah.
I would say that I think, and maybe I'm saying this because I'm an American, but I feel like this movie works really well because I look at this movie like it's not an American movie, and I don't think that it is an American movie, really. Is it?
I don't think so. No, not at all.
And I think that that's why it works, is that there might be a couple of 2 Americans in it.
If this was American crime caper, I would not be.
No, I just feel like it wouldn't be as funny or witty. And we'll get into that, the differences in comedy and why it works.
Well, we'll go to our first clip, and then we'll start talking about Fish Called Wanda.
You English, you think you're so superior, don't you? Well, you're the filth of the planet. A bunch of pompous, badly dressed, poverty-stricken, sexually repressed football hooligans. Goodbye, Archie.
Well, at least we're not irretrievably vulgar.
You know your problem? You don't like winners.
Winners?
Yeah. Winners.
Winners like North Vietnam?
Shut up! We did not lose Vietnam. It was a tie.
I'm telling you, baby, they kicked a little ass there. Boy, they whooped your hide real good.
No, they didn't.
Oh, yes, they did.
Oh, no, they didn't.
Oh, yes, they did.
Oh, no, they didn't. Shut up! Goodbye, Archie.
You gonna shoot me?
Yes. Yes, afraid so, old chap. Sorry.
Look, Otto, look! Revenge!
It's Ken! Coming to kill me! How are you gonna catch me?
So Fish Called Wanda was written by John Cleese and directed by Charles Crichton, who was a famous British comedy director. But at the time that he had directed A Fish Called Wanda, there had been about 25 years since he had
It's been quite some time.
had worked.
Yeah.
But John Cleese had faith that he would be able to bring the right comedic direction to the film. And Charles Crichton was 77 when he directed A Fish Called Wanda, and did get nominated for Best Director at the Academy Awards. So, and it was the last film that he directed. So,
Yeah.
I think there's probably a few directors in the history of cinema that could kind of go out with a bang like that.
Yeah.
Pretty awesome.
And a lot of that was, with John Cleese's assistant.
Yeah,
too.
John Cleese definitely, I would say, was
Yeah,
a
I think he was a
co-director.
co-director, yeah.
Co-director, uncredited co-director.
It was kind of like Charles Crichton was directing the movie, and John Cleese was kind of became in charge of directing the actors.
Yeah. And John Cleese had really become, he was kind of like a superstar. And
we should say, he's from Monty Python. He and
Yeah.
Michael Palin are from Monty Python fame.
And he did Faulty Towers prior to that, into Monty Python. and really, sort of became this like really huge comedic figure.
It was a big deal.
And so wrote the script, put this together, but did want some American actors.
He was in Silverado with Kevin Kline.
Yeah.
And I know that he asked him, and they kind of workshopped a little bit of Kevin Kline's character together for a couple days and really fleshed that one out. And then Jamie Lee Curtis came about when John Cleese, he and his daughter went to go see Trading Places in 83. That was 83.
Yeah.
And he kind of fell in love with Jamie Lee Curtis and asked her, and I think she was pretty skeptical at first. And I think in the initial conversation, or maybe when they met up afterwards to have a conversation, about actually doing it, he mentioned a possible nude scene, because I think that was Trading Places was her first nude scene.
Yeah,
in
so,
topless. And she's like, okay, I get where this is going. And pretty cool turn of events. Jamie Lee Curtis was like, yeah, it'd be even better actually if you did the nude scene. And that is actually what happened.
I think it makes the movie funnier.
It's
for it.
Totally funnier. So John Cleese ended up with that scene instead of Jamie Lee Curtis.
And this is one that John Cleese had worked on for quite a while. Like, I think he had told Kevin Kline, yeah, I'm working on, I got this idea of this part for you in mind, specifically written for Kevin Kline. And Kevin Kline's like, yeah, sure, it sounds great. And I guess Kevin Kline said, very rare does someone say that, but then like 2 years later or whatever, produce a script. And it seemed that John Cleese really had, the people in mind, was writing specifically for...
He did like 13 drafts of the script too.
Yeah, and it's a very tight script. I mean, it's like a very well-placed, well-timed comedy. There's just like very little fat on this movie. I mean, it is a movie that... comedies to me usually... that clock in more than like 95 minutes can get pretty long in the tooth, especially if they have a very thin story. This one's about an hour and 48 minutes, and this movie just moves. I mean, it is like, to me, it has like a breakneck pace. And part of the reason why is because it has a very intricate and interesting story. And outside of the comedy, I think it has a good storyline and a good plot. But then you add all these comedic bits in there, I think you really come out with something special and unique. And that's why I think that this is one of the rare comedies that doesn't wear out its welcome. And even though they do repeat a couple of jokes, they build on it, this is one that I just feel like it stays fresh.
It does. You can really tell when watching this movie, and I don't mean you can really tell as in it becomes something that's distracting, but you can tell how well planned it is without it seeming stodgy or inorganic or something like that. It really feels very natural and just incredibly well staged, and that's all thanks to John Cleese. And coming from the background that he has, that for someone like Jamie Lee Curtis was not really used to, like John Cleese wasn't much on ad-libbing, and especially coming from a writer's point of view, you don't really ad-lib when you're working with a writer generally.
Yeah. And I feel like all the characters in the movie are really well defined. They're very sharp, and we get information about the characters and who they are without it being cheap and sort of like ho-hum kind of way, where a lot of times, in American comedy, you'll see like this guy's down on his luck, like the opening credits, he's walking, the titles are going, he gets splashed by a puddle, a car drives by and splashes him, and then his briefcase falls over and all the stuff falls out, and then he's late for work and the boss is onto him, and like
we're handed all of this
we kind of get all this in the first 3 or 4 minutes, whereas like this movie, I feel like we kind of get they dig a little bit deeper into the characters as the movie goes along. I think too, the difference with this movie than I would say an American comedy is like a lot of times in American comedy there's like usually just one comic, and everything is sort of like perpetuated on what that comic does.
Like there may be bit players around them.
There could be bit players, and it's usually like a really thin, and what comes to mind is like a lot of Eddie Murphy movies, a lot of Adam Sandler movies, and I love some of these movies, but a lot of them, there's almost no, the storyline is so basic, the plot is so thin, it's just like the comedic actor doing their comedy
It's based on
bits.
that person.
Yeah, and a lot of times it gets pretty old, and then the in-between stuff can be pretty boring or pretty lackluster, whereas this movie doesn't live and die by any person's performance. Like there's a storyline, there's like a plot, and it's more about timing.
Mm-hmm.
It's not so much about somebody riffing or doing some sort of like improvised bit. Like everything feels very honed in and like meticulous. And one final thing I'll say just about the, comparing American comedies to British comedies with Fish Called Wanda. And admittedly, I have not seen very many British comedies. So in this discussion of Fish Called Wanda, representing all the British comedies, which I have not seen, I feel like a big difference, I would say, again, is take, for instance, a show like Seinfeld, which I know is a television show and is situational, but considered one of the biggest and funniest American comedies. The humor there is again, it's situation based. It's what I consider to be a very American comedy style, and that's not so much being so focused on a story being plot driven, but more so relying on like setups. Like you're setting things up, and you'll go to a ridiculous length to just set up a joke. Versus a Fish Called Wanda, which to me again is more, there is humor. And they do set some things up, but it's more character based. It's more they'll use humor, but they'll also use that to dig in deeper with the characters and make them more rich. And then it's definitely more plot driven. Things don't just happen for no reason so that they can get to a joke.
Another thing too with the Seinfeld comparison is like with something like Seinfeld, which I think is a hilarious show. I love it. But with something like that, you almost have the central character and all of the supporting characters around, like all of them are just a strong individually on their own. But in a sense, they are central figures, and they are kind of, maybe not, I don't want to say putting down, but the instead of the comedy happening to that central character, it is everyone around those characters that are the butt of the jokes. And in something like A Fish Called Wanda, it is these characters that are the butt of the jokes, for one of a better phrase.
Yeah.
Like it's happening, all of the comedy is happening to them without it being fat guy in a little coat type of humor.
It's very contained.
Yeah.
Well, we'll go to another clip, Fish Called Wanda, and then we'll come back. We'll talk about the cast and a little more of the behind the scenes.
All right.
Don't call me stupid.
Oh, right! To call you stupid would be an insult to stupid people! I've known sheep that could outwit you. I've worn dresses with higher IQs, but you think you're an intellectual, don't you, ape?
Apes don't read philosophy.
Yes, they do, Otto. They just don't understand it. Now, let me correct you on a couple things, okay? Aristotle was not Belgian.
Oh.
The central message of Buddhism is not every man for himself.
You
And
read...
the London Underground is not a political movement. Those are all mistakes, Otto. I looked them up. Now, you have just assaulted the one man who can keep you out of jail and make you rich. So what are you going to do about it, huh? What would an intellectual do? What would Plato do?
Apologize.
Pardon me?
Apologize.
What?
Apologize!
Right!
I'm sorry.
No. Not to me. To Archie. And make it good, or we're dead.
So this movie very much is a dark comedy.
Yes.
And it gets pretty dark.
Pretty cruel.
One of the
Yeah.
things I think when we're talking about differentiating between American and British comedy is the amount of pet violence that takes place in this movie. And pet violence is something that really doesn't pop up in American comedies too much. I mean, the National Lampoon's Vacations certainly have a little bit of pet violence in each one of their movies. But outside of that, Americans are not really into seeing it, and the British are a very pet-loving society. But pet violence is very evident. But I do know that in this movie, There's 3 dog deaths,
Yeah.
multiple fish deaths, and they had to tone down
The dog deaths.
The dog deaths. They had to tone down the violence in them because American audiences were responding
Like
very negatively.
there's one, let's see, it's 3 Yorkies that all eat it. One gets dragged off by a Doberman. One gets smashed by like a piece of concrete that's getting lowered. And one gets run over. Yeah.
I believe he gets run over, yeah. All accidentally killed by Ken, the pet-loving
Michael Palin.
Michael Palin's character. And that's the joke, is that he's a huge animal lover, but he's
the animal rights
trying to rub
activist
out
and-
this woman who's a witness to in the court
To the bank robbery.
Yeah. And he's trying to kill her, but he keeps accidentally killing her dogs with every assassination attempt. But yeah, it's something that, it's very dark. And though the dog deaths are played out in a very silly manner,
They were a little bit more grotesque.
in a scene where Kevin Kline is sort of torturing Ken, the animal lover, for information. Ken loves his fish. He's even named one of his fish Wanda, hence the title. And Kevin Kline is trying to get information, and Ken won't answer. Michael Palin's character won't
Because everyone's
answer.
been double crossing each other and hiding where the
Kevin
loot
Kline
is.
starts eating his goldfish one by one
Yeah.
in a very demented, dark, malicious scene.
Well, he's got him tied up to a chair, and he's what is he? He's eating French fries, or he's chips.
Yeah.
What's he say? The one thing that the British culinary cultures contributed are chips, and what goes with chips? Fish. That's right. And so he has Ken, Michael Palin, tied up to this chair and sticks ketchup-covered French fries up his nose, and then starts eating Ken's fish in front of him in order to find out where the hidden bank loot is.
Yeah, which brings us into the cast here. Kevin Kline's portrayal of this British hating American, and I think that his character is written specifically to sort of like embody this sort of like American egoism, this very self-conscious, like shallow, aggressive person. Yeah. And his character, if he wasn't so
very
funny,
egocentric as well.
So egocentric, but if it's played with so much humor, it's so over the top. You would think that you wouldn't be able to stand.
It's like he's so charming, but you hate him at the same time.
You wouldn't think that you'd be able to stand this character, but Kevin Kline is able to give it just the right amount of swarmy and charm that the character needs to make him totally hysterical.
Like you're kind of attracted to him, but you also want to slap him straight in the face.
And it's just like with every moment that he's on screen, it's just like I can't take my eyes off of him.
Yeah.
It's just like this is a incredible performance, comedic performance. One that very much like, again, deserves the Oscar that was awarded, but just looking back on it, it is just so good.
He's so spot on.
So amazing.
And I would say also the antithesis of him would be if he's supposed to be the, quintessential nasty American, that John Cleese's character, who plays the barrister who's representing the one of the bank robbers who got pinched in this whole thing. John Cleese's character is representing the typical stodgy, uptight British.
Yeah, the just the epitome of like stodgy Britishness. Yeah,
and it all is very intentional. But I feel like John Cleese didn't write this to hit you in the face with it. It's just he's making a joke out of it. He's making fun of both British people and Americans all at once.
Yeah, and it is good to say, not hitting you over the head, because this is a movie that is very brash, but it doesn't feel like you're being like force fed these characters.
Yeah,
they come alive on the screen, and it is. Again, I think this is where a sharp and smart comedy knows that tightrope of like not making a character too outrageous that they're unlikable. And I'll say this for early Jim Carrey movies. You know, I love Jim Carrey, but I know that his early roles can turn people off because like Ace Ventura, Dumb and Dumber, The Mask, Cable Guy. There's no tightrope being walked there. I mean, it is like brash, in your face. Immediately, you either have to jump on board for a character like that, or get off, because there's no. If you're 5 minutes into one of those early Jim Carrey movies and you don't like it, it's not going to get better for you.
It's not going to get better.
It's just you're it's not going to let up.
Yeah.
You know, his character is not going to deviate from that full speed ahead like style of comedy. And I love it, you know. I mean, and I'm fully on board.
I love it too, but it is hitting you in the face.
But I do think this is a movie that could be that. You know, Kevin Kline's character could initially you could think that, but you can kind of grow to love the character, even though he is very, very, very much like an aggressive, crazy character.
Just gross American.
And one last thing I'll say about Kevin Kline is, you know, we've come to know Kevin Kline as a comedic actor. He was played more serious roles in Sophie's Choice and Big Chill. And so this was you know, the character we became more familiar with in In and Out and Dave. Yeah. The sort of goofball silliness that he brought to other roles. This was sort of, I think, one of the first roles that really showed his comedic chops. And have to say, give a shout out to Kevin Kline as being a hometown hero for us.
Of course.
You know, as a St. Louis treasure.
Yeah, we like to grab onto that one. He's so immensely talented.
So, want to talk a little bit about Jamie Lee Curtis. I know we've kind of discussed this a little bit off the mic. When we do these episodes, we try to find a lot of the old interviews, and at the time the movie came out, you know, a lot of these actors will do the talk show circuit or whatever they could find. Yeah. And some of the interviews that you'll uncover on YouTube are quite entertaining because, you know, the whole cast was on the Donahue show.
I watched that whole thing.
Piped in via satellite.
It was really,
2 of them were on the show, and then 2 of them were piped in via satellite.
Really funny.
But through this whole, like, watching these interviews, I really got the sense that Jamie Lee Curtis was, like, really not... It didn't really dawn on me that she really wasn't looked at as such a serious actor as some of the other people in this movie. And I have forgotten that, you know, she was known as like a horror genre actor, and then did Trading Places. You know, after Fish Called Wanda, her career really took off. Yeah. But I got the sense that she wasn't given as much credit as she probably should have.
No, in so many interviews, like they'll ask her, so what's it like working with 3 comedic geniuses? And it's just like she answers every time that question comes up, she answers it in such a smart ass way. Like it's a backhanded compliment.
And and because I think that Jamie Lee Curtis really pulls this movie together in a lot of ways.
She really does.
Like she's like the middle ground. And I also think that she really does deliver not just a great performance, but it's a very balanced performance where, you know, she is this very deviant character. You know, she's
manipulating everybody.
Very manipulative, and
she also makes out with all of the male leads.
Yeah, and also manipulating via sexuality. But I do think that she is a great asset to the movie. I do think that as far as like the cast goes, she's like the straight. She plays like the straight character.
Yeah.
Everyone else is pretty outrageous, but she's sort of like, you know, down the line, like keeps her cool, keeps her balance. Everybody else has this sort of like outrageousness to them. And I think you need that. I think when you have like this sort of ensemble cast, you know, you usually have these more intense characters and a more subdued character.
She's the one, you know, is going to get away with the money.
Yeah.
More, she has the biggest chance of getting away with the money.
She's the smart one out of everybody.
Yes.
And I do appreciate that, and I do think that as much as maybe she wasn't credited prior to people seeing this movie, I think this movie is like yet another example of how great of an actress she is, and also how she worked with John Cleese. Like things weren't going well in certain scenes, and so she would speak up and try different things and push the character further to give the character more depth. And I think that's really great. I think especially in the comedy where that's not always something that's thought of, like the depth of the character, or the motivation of a character.
Yeah,
usually in a comedy, it's just like, it just has to be funny. But
Yeah.
this, I think like she was striving for something more because some of the comedy elements were coming from elsewhere, and she wanted to get the character down and make sure that, there was room to breathe. And I really buy into the sort of relationship that she has with John Cleese. And even though I wouldn't say that this movie borders on a romantic comedy, there is a tiny bit there.
A little bit, yeah.
And it's enough to be believable. I think that she, as much as you can believe that she would be down with John Cleese's character, there's enough there, and she plays it well enough to where it is within the vein of reality.
And she did say that in making this movie, that especially for someone like John Cleese, who is very rigid on no ad-libbing and like we rehearse this scene 80 times in order to get it perfect. She said that it was the first time on a movie where someone was open to listening to everyone's idea, like all of the actors' ideas, and incorporating that into the characters and into the story, and being open to something like that, which is pretty cool for someone that's really rigid. And she also said it would most likely affect her on future productions that she would do of, now that she had gotten used to that after previously, like that's not something that ever worked on movies, was actually listening to the actors.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think everybody really adds so much to this movie. And even Michael Palin, I think it's really funny that, okay, so the bank robbers are Kevin Kline, Jamie Lee Curtis, Michael Palin, and Tom Jorgensen, I believe is the actor. Those three are the bank robbers. And like we already said, John Cleese is the barrister representing the one that got pinched. It is really funny to me that the two Monty Python guys, that being John Cleese and Michael Palin, are probably, they add a lot of comedy to this movie. Mainly the comedy element is contingent upon Kevin Kline and Jamie Lee Curtis's interactions, thus facilitating comedic interactions happening.
I do find
really
John Cleese's reactions to things comedic.
Because
pretty
he plays
much
it
on
so straight.
Every step of the way, just him reacting to things is hysterical to me.
Because he is reacting in a stodgy British way.
And Michael Palin's character...
We need to go into this, though.
Treading lightly, Michael Palin's character has a stutter, which is... I don't even want... I can't say the word... I can't defend the word tastefully, but I think it's done... And it's definitely done... Played up... is played to make for laughs.
He said specifically he did this he didn't want it to come off as just like a jokey thing that you're laughing at someone with a stutter. And I don't laugh at it because he has a stutter. I think it's the way that he plays having a stutter and what's being said is what's getting the laugh, not necessarily laughing at someone with a stutter.
Was it Michael Palin's dad that had a stutter? Or
it was Michael Palin's dad,
and he said he thought that it would be funny.
John Cleese wanted to have a character with a stutter that had to give some important information.
Yeah, and Michael Palin's father had a stutter.
Yeah.
And so he was pulling from reality.
Yeah.
And his taste, and again, nowadays, I could say I can't defend it.
Is Forrest Gump offensive? You know what I mean?
Like, well, yeah, of course, but it's like in the context, it's funny. And I don't find it to be mean-spirited, but I can't defend it. But I do, it is in Kevin Kline's meanness toward his...
Yes, there's a lot.
Debilitation is...
But he's also the despicable character, too.
I know, but it's like his crassness is funny because it's just so unnecessarily brutal. But...
I don't feel like it is the same... I would say, along with the stutter, the kind of off-color comments about all British men being gay, or like kind of off-color gay comments. I don't feel like that the gay comments and the stutter, I don't feel are hostile.
I don't either, and I mean, this is a movie that's not lowbrow in any way.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that it maintains a certain level of elegance in its comedy, even though it goes to some pretty outrageous lengths.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is up there. I mean, this is like a very unusually made, sharp comedy that I just don't think that there's. I mean, I think this is one of the movies that I've seen in a while. If you haven't seen it, I just encourage you go revisit Fish Called Wanda, because it is. I mean, it just like I was in a fantastic mood after I watched this. This is a really funny movie.
It is a really funny movie, and I think as far as like on the offensive lines and on how dark it goes with its comedy, it really walks like perfectly a tightrope on. You could either go on one side and it just like flopping and not being funny, or just going, ooh, that's really like my brow, that's a little too much. It walks like such a perfect line in that you don't feel scumbaggy laughing at the things that are said and the things that are done in it. Even at, I mean, I think I've said before in this podcast, I stay away from pretty much anything with animal violence, or I'm just like, you know what, that's going in a special category. But this has a lot of it, but still I don't put it in the, like, it makes me feel bad.
Yeah, it
afterwards.
doesn't bother me. And
Yeah.
we're definitely ones that would be highly affected by it. Finally, I want to say, like, this was one of those lightning in a bottle type movies. I mean, this was a movie that was made for a relatively small budget. Very, as far as I've read, like came together extremely well. Was a huge success internationally. Made a lot of money. Was nominated for 3 Oscars: Best Director, Best Supporting Actor, Best Screenplay. So an all-around success story. I know that there is a movie. I have not seen it.
Fierce Creatures.
Sort of a spiritual sequel to Fish Called Wanda. It came out in the early 2000s, I believe.
A spiritual sequel, meaning that it has mainly like
has
all
basically all the same
members.
cast members, but they're playing different characters, not the same characters. I've never seen it. I've not read too many things about it. I've actually saw an interview with John Cleese where he said he has very few regrets, but one of them is probably making Fierce Creatures.
Yeah.
But one of these days I'm eventually going to get around to seeing it. But
man, you know what the budget for this movie was, and then what it made?
It was like $8 million or something.
Yeah, it was like $7.5 million, and then it made like nearly $63 million.
Which
Which
doesn't sound like a lot by today's standards, but 1989
and
for a comedy with not huge comedic stars.
I mean, it did have, Monty Python, but
I mean, in America,
for
for making so much money in America, yeah.
And I mean, just thinking about budget versus box office, like that's insane.
Yeah,
that's a insane profit.
Yeah, so
it's pretty cool for a small movie.
Yeah,
like
absolutely,
this.
and again, a fond farewell to director Charles Crichton. To again, most directors in their 70s making movies usually put out 3 or 4 movies and critically they're kind of bashed, or they're just not that good. So,
but John Cleese wanted him because he was such a pioneer of a early form of comedy that came out of was it Ealing Theater, Ealing comedy.
Yeah. I don't know too much about it, but that was
it was like a specific style, or it was like a production company with like a 10-year run. It made a lot of Ealing films that came out of this company, but it was like a good 10-year time span of Ealing comedies is what they're called, which was a pretty formative British comedy, and he was kind of a pioneer director of quite a few.
Well, if you haven't seen it in a while, Fish Called Wanda, readily available. Just you can get it on Amazon. You can usually get a DVD pretty cheap.
It's such a good movie.
Yeah, it's an owner for me. It's one that a fantastic Blu-ray edition, if Blu-ray is your thing, which I'm into. Arrow Video recently released a fantastic Blu-ray with tons of behind-the-scenes stuff, a great transfer. Highly recommend picking it up if you if this is a movie that you want in your collection.
And a lot of the press and promo that came out around this, John Cleese did. I mean, I have to say, of all of the press that I saw for this, one of the things that is still, because it just is nonstop, is the kind of like ageist humor that happens between Jamie Lee Curtis and John Cleese when promoting this movie. It's just like, it almost seems like they hate each other in the press for it, but you can see that time and time again that it happens in interviews about the movie. Like, they're just so dedicated to like adhering to that it's admirable and really funny, and I could see how doing that would evoke some type of, would make someone want to go, man, what's the story behind this movie? It's man, this movie's so good, and I can't say enough good things about it.
Well, let's move on to our picks of the week. So your pick of the week, tied to Fish Called Wanda via Kevin Kline,
yes,
was Soap Dish, which is a movie that you loaned to me 4 or 5 months ago. I enjoyed it. It wasn't.
You did enjoy it.
It wasn't 100% my thing.
I think your exact words were somewhere around, it wasn't my thing, but I could see how you would like it.
And I probably meant that in the most loving way possible.
It is totally my type of comedy.
It totally is.
Yeah. You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. So, Lindsay, what can you tell us about Soap Dish?
Well, with the quick humor that's been contained in A Fish Called Wanda that we've been talking about, it really made me think about this 1991 immensely satirical soap opera comedy, Soap Dish, not only starring Kevin Kline, but also Sally Field, Elizabeth Shue, Robert Downey Jr., Whoopi Goldberg, Kathy Moriarty, Terry Hatcher, Gary Marshall, Carrie Fisher, and Kathy Najimy. I mean, dude, the cast is insane. Oscar winners and nominees everywhere. And they're all turned up to 11 for this movie. Soap Dish seems like a real dream of a movie for actors because I feel that it's perfectly timed in a lot of the same ways like Soap Dish is. And it requires an actor to be over the top, but to also take yourself really seriously all at once. So the plot is almost too involved to break down, so we'll go with this. It's about the ins and outs and behind the scenes of a long-running soap opera with failing ratings. One thing leads to another, and real life begins to bleed into the plot of the show. Secrets are uncovered, and endless amount of drama begins to unfold, leading to the lives of the actors and the real lives of the actors involved, leading to their lives changing forever during a live broadcast of the show. Now, whether or not it truly is, Soap Dish feels like it was created by people on the inside of the entertainment industry with details on how productions go down, but it's even more amped up, obviously. It's a reality show soap opera within a fictional soap opera, a screwball comedy, just a lot of twisted and scandalous subplots, and that's what makes it brilliant. It can almost get away with anything. The drama that's unfolding in each of the actors' lives, mainly Sally Field, Kevin Kline, and Elizabeth Shue, is being intertwined in the storyline of the TV show. The movie is fast and involved, but not too fast that you get lost. It's confusing, but that kind of becomes the norm. And I honestly feel like if this were a less talented cast, that you could really not buy what happens in the movie. Another reason that this movie works is that the humor is being played with complete seriousness. So it's a movie that knows it's a comedy, but the actors inside of it are living it like it's like they're in total crisis mode instead of just playing it for laughs. Whether the soap opera writers for the show, which the show in the movie is called The Sun Also Sets, which is such a soap opera name, whether they're writing these storylines, these dramatic storylines to increase ratings, like a murder, a trial, an affair, a brain transplant in the middle of a restaurant, or the writers for the movie Soap Dish are trying or are playing up the real world drama behind the soap opera involving, a secret daughter, a potential incest, an affair, a sexy scandal with a producer and an actress, or attempting to save the fledgling career of an aging actress. This movie is hilarious. It's just a great behind the scenes reality check, I feel like, for the entertainment industry. I'd really like to know what Hollywood folk think of this movie, if they lovingly adore it or think it hits too close to home, or if it's completely off base. I mean, I don't know. I don't work on a soap opera or on a TV show. I'm curious to see how close to home it hits. And while there are many revelations at the end of Soap Dish and all throughout the movie, there is one that's kind of uncool. One character at the end, not to spoil anything, but one character at the end is exposed as a transgendered person to explain away one dramatic plot point. And one could look at this as yet another example of transphobia in films. I mean, do we need to talk about Ace Ventura, The Crying Game, Zoolander, Trainspotting, Sleepaway Camp, Silence of the Lambs, 40-Year-Old Virgin, Crocodile Dundee? I mean, just to name a few here. It was a thing for a while, and kind of, still is, but definitely during the 80s and early 90s. But here's why I think Soap Dish gets a tiny pass, or maybe not a pass, just like you can explain it a little bit more. The entire plot of this movie is a soap opera, something like misgendering or a quote-unquote sex change operation plot. I mean, this is where the idea comes from, using something like this as the biggest plot twist that you never saw coming. And try to think about this from a late 80s or early 90s perspective. This wasn't a heavily explored topic, and it wasn't mainstream at all. I mean, in fact, anybody in the LGBT community craved any type of visibility at this point. Any type of visibility was good, even if you were the butt of a joke. But there were a lot of misconceptions about what it meant to be trans at the time. So it should be said beforehand that this plot twist does indeed exist at the end of Soap Dish, but I feel like it was very deliberate because the whole point of the movie is a parody of a soap opera parodying real life. But yes, you could definitely be offended. Obviously, I wouldn't be bringing it up if I didn't understand that. Soap Dish does break the wall between fiction and reality. I think that's what I love most about it. And the comedic talent that's involved is, I think it's probably the cast is what I love most about this movie. The moral of the story is that real life is much more interesting than anything that could be dreamt up or written into a soap opera, which is most commonly thought of as the most ridiculous vehicle for fictionalized stories. Hell, soap operas have been around since 1930s, really, if we think about it. I do feel like Soap Dish is at risk of being lost in the bin of $1.99 comedies left behind. And despite its problematic ending that I've just mentioned, the entirety of this movie is still one of my most favorites out there. I've been known to quote this movie quite often, Justin, not that you would know or anything. But I do feel like with Soap Dish that life doesn't imitate art. It tops it. I don't know how many times I've quoted this movie.
Yeah. I did, when you told me this was one of your favorite movies, that's all I needed to hear to check it out. So and I enjoyed it. It is a nice ensemble piece. I think that I could go for a second viewing. There's a lot going on in this movie. It's very fast paced.
It's ridiculous. It's madcap. There's fainting. There's
I think it helps if you grew up on soap operas, which is something that I didn't really. I saw some when I was growing up, but I didn't really know that world, or I was so far removed from that world when I watched Soap Dish. I think if I would have seen this movie in high school, because I probably saw some soap operas like during the summertime, being off of school in the summer, like in 8th or 9th grade. Mm-hmm. So I think if I would have seen this movie in high school or something, I would have.
I mean, I don't ever feel like that this movie was targeting teenagers by any stretch of the imagination. I feel like I saw this movie because my mom liked it, and I knew of the movie because pretty much everyone in it was famous. And I didn't necessarily grow up with soap operas or watching soap operas, but I think I always grew up wanting to be an actor. So I think the flair for the dramatics always kind of was there within me. And this movie is just nonstop, like over the top comedic storylines and acting. So I think in an over the top sort of American way, this movie is a pretty tastefully done, distasteful comedy full of a bunch of scumbags.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that.
Of course. Well, why don't you tell me about yours?
My movie, my pick of the week.
The movie that you made for your pick of the week. Yes, please tell me about your pick of the week, Justin.
I chose Granville, U.S.A., which was connected to Fish Called Wanda via Jamie Lee Curtis. This movie came out in 1984. This was a very tiny film that I saw many times growing up on like a Sunday afternoon. It is a coming-of-age story that takes place in a very small Midwestern town, which is very relatable to me. This is kind of one of those towns where like you would stop and get gas on a road trip, and you'd wonder like, what do people do in this town? Well, this movie sort of gives you a idea of what that lifestyle is like. It stars a huge up-and-coming cast. Main stars C. Thomas Howell, Jamie Lee Curtis, and Patrick Swayze. Kind of wild because C. Thomas Howell and Patrick Swayze had previously starred in Red Dawn together, and just the year before that were both in The Outsiders together. So these two were, in the span of just a year and a half, were in 3 movies together. This was probably one of the first few Jamie Lee Curtis films outside of her being sort of a teenage scream queen in the horror genre. This movie altogether, it's not a great film. It's kind of meandering. It sort of shows how these characters feel sort of trapped in this small town. C. Thomas Howell wants to be an oceanographer. He wants to move to Florida. He's a senior in high school. Jamie Lee Curtis's character is sort of a gruff mechanic. She runs a demolition derby called the Speedway. That's sort of like the main entertainment that the town has on the weekends. Patrick Swayze is sort of the big demolition derby star. His wife is always kind of cheating on him, going out. She's having an affair. His wife is portrayed by Jennifer Jason Leigh. There's also small roles by John Cusack and Joan Cusack. Again, this movie's very meandering. I do care about the characters, and I do think it's an enjoyable film. It does make for a nice, lazy afternoon movie. This is like the perfect lazy Sunday afternoon movie. But I think the movie could have helped by having like a stronger director. I mean, we kind of drift in and out of these characters' lives. Sometimes they interact, sometimes they don't. But overall, it really feels realistic to me, like sort of like what life in a small town is like. The movie itself was shot on location in Pontiac, Illinois, which is about 3 hours north of us from here in St. Louis. And it really has the look and the feel of a Midwestern small town. I think it really benefited the movie, taking the production and filming in a realistic, real small town. I do believe in the end credits, they're all hanging out, watching this town parade. It doesn't say so. I haven't found any information on this, but I just want to go ahead and say I'm pretty sure that was just going on, and they were just kind of rolling camera while they had like Jamie Lee Curtis and Patrick Swayze hanging out. This is a movie, I think it was meant to be a comedy. There's a couple of funny bits in there, but overall it is a very harmless, nice coming-of-age story. I think the main draw to this movie of watching it nowadays would be to just see this kind of big cast, unknown at the time. It was a movie that was pretty hard to come by until about 4 or 5 years ago. It's been recently released to DVD. You can find it on Amazon Prime now. Again, not the greatest film, but I still enjoy it, and I watched it a couple times leading up to this episode, and yeah, it has some nice authenticity to it.
I can't wait to watch this. I just remembered actually tonight that you gave this to me, and maybe I'll watch that tonight actually when I go home.
If you were on the fence of whether or not you thought Patrick Swayze was just a handsome man, it's like the literally the moment that he comes on screen. I think like later films he kind of, but this is like before he became an action star, but he just has like a presence about him.
You know what's funny? I don't know if I ever really considered Patrick Swayze an action star. I mean, Roadhouse.
Like Point Break, Roadhouse. Yeah, I guess I don't know. I
even
guess
with Roadhouse, he's just a good guy.
Yeah,
he's just a good guy.
I'll say I love Patrick Swayze.
Yeah,
I don't
me
think.
too.
I mean, Patrick Swayze doesn't have a ton of range. He kind of always plays like kind of like a brooding,
he doesn't
stoic character. But you know what?
David Boreanaz wouldn't have a career without him.
I'll take it all day long.
Yeah.
So those are our picks of the week: Soap Dish and Grandview, USA. We'll move along here. This is your Murray moment.
Chicks dig me because I rarely wear underwear, and when I do, it's usually something unusual.
I think I need a root canal. I'm sure I need a long, slow root canal.
You gonna come and shake my monkey tree again?
Oh, what does that old queen know? She didn't even show.
Hey, this is so scrumptious. Is this hand shucked?
The flowing robes, the grace, all striking.
That was fun.
One of my favorite things about this Murray Moment segment is bringing to light all the underreported Billy bit parts, stories that aren't the most covered, or insights from the man himself via interviews or maybe in his own words. I try to shy away from the obvious ones, but, sometimes they eke in there due to whatever our main feature happens to be that week. When trying to connect Billy to any person who started out being famous before 1980, it's almost a solid guarantee you can take it back to Saturday Night Live. And I could certainly tell you about that time that Michael Palin from A Fish Called Wanda has hosted SNL 4 times. 3 of those times were with Billy in the cast, and one time, the first one, Billy said that it was the best episode all that season. But you know what? I'll just stop that one there. Okay, anyway, I'll move away, or let's say adjacently away from Saturday Night Live, onto another Billy and Michael Palin connection. It's 2019, and we all know what a mockumentary film is, right, Justin? We know you either love it or you hate it, depending. And although this concept was, around as early as, say, like the 1930s with Orson Welles' War of the Worlds, if you want to consider that kind of a mockumentary, because it was. I mean, that went through the 60s, and it probably wasn't even popularized really until Rob Reiner brought us the amazingly ridiculous This Is Spinal Tap in 1984. But Justin, did you know about the little British documentary TV movie parodying the Beatles called The Rutles, All You Need Is Cash?
I did not.
All right. Well, let me tell you I could go on for a while about this, but we'll just talk about Billy.
The Rutles?
The Rutles. Rutles. The Rutles. Primarily, it was starring Eric Idle from Monty Python, and Michael Palin was in this as well. It was definitely an Eric Idle push. So, okay. This predates Spinal Tap by almost 6 years, and wouldn't you know it, as I said, Billy has a bit part in it. And it might only be about 60 seconds long, but it's one of the most memorable moments of all the cameos in this film. And there are quite a few. I mean, on top of SNL, there's also SNL characters. There's also Mick Jagger, Paul Simon. Anyway, you just should check it out. Okay, I'm getting off track. This cameo is one of my most favorite Billy moments, I'd have to say. And we all know that he's been in, especially later in his career, he's done bit roles, but this is probably one of my favorites. So Billy plays Bill Murray the K, a play on the actual New York disc jockey Murray the K. The real-life Murray the K worked as a DJ from the late 50s to early 70s, gaining massive popularity during the 60s as one of the earliest and most ardent supporters of the Beatles. He was always feverishly encouraging American radio listeners to absorb everything the Beatles. Although there were many, quote-unquote, fifth Beatles out there, Murray the K was one of the hardest contenders for this title. Now, why was Billy even involved in the first place? Well, that's, of course, Lorne Michaels. It always goes back to Lorne Michaels, creator of SNL, and also the reason that Gilda Radner, Dan Aykroyd, and John Belushi also did cameos in the film. Lorne fell in love with the Rutles short film A Hard Day's Rut, which originally aired on the BBC in '76, and later as an SNL short. It was, of course, a play on the film A Hard Day's Night, and I remember seeing it's just like a little bit of this. I remember seeing it when I was a kid, much later, of course, not 76, but I remember seeing it and not knowing what it was from, but it was kind of funny to go back and realize what this little sketch was actually from this movie. At the time of filming, Billy had recently joined the cast of SNL and naturally fit the name portion of the Murray the K character, so it was a perfect fit. Apparently, the almost 60 seconds of Billy when he was on screen was mostly improvised, go figure. I'm sure that there's more footage out there, but I haven't been able to track down any of that unaired footage. Billy was at the height of his almost getting off on making people laugh era of his career, like when he really, really, really loved making people laugh. So even if he did excitedly scream throughout this entire 60 seconds, he's screaming the entire time. It's incredible. You can't help but love every single second and feel that Rutles mania that we were all meant to feel. I can only imagine if I were a Beatles fan at the time. Justin, can we go to a clip from Rutles? All You Need Is Cash.
I'm finding it here. Here we go.
Flushing animals, what do you want to know? What do you want to hear? If you call me up at 555-2160 and say you won't hear anything but the Rutles, I'm going to come looking for you. I mean it, because it's Rutles Day. They're going to be here tomorrow talking about their trousers. It's a big, big day here in Flushing. Let's give them a big round of applause. I know I can't hear you, but I know I can pick up what you're saying, baby. The scene is here in Flushing. The whole world's eyes are on Flushing because the Prefab Four are coming to town tomorrow to talk about their trousers.
Well, I don't know about this. Do you know about this?
Oh, Billy, you in that Rutles shirt and awesomely terrible wig that's kind of misplaced on your head. It's one of my most favorite parts in this whole movie. Rutles, All You Need Is Cash. Check it out if you can. It's definitely out there. Like, this clip is on YouTube, but I do encourage you to track down this movie. It is available in kind of like a little edited version on YouTube. But you can.
Was this a feature-length movie?
It was about like an hour and 15 minutes long.
Okay.
You can definitely find it. Mostly all of it on YouTube. If you're a fan of Monty Python or Spinal Tap, like that type of humor, like you're gonna like this. And of course, if you're a fan of the Beatles, I feel like in the way that Spinal Tap was directly making fun of some bands or just like the idea of being in a metal band or a band in general, the Rutles movie is, it wasn't necessarily making fun of it. It was a parody, but it was done with a lot of love for the Beatles, I would say. It's a really fun movie and kind of held within high regard, I would say.
I definitely gotta check this out. Sounds up my alley.
And there's like, I might be getting this wrong, but I mean, there's 12 good songs in it, and they're all plays off of Beatles songs.
Yeah.
It's pretty funny.
Well, thanks for that.
Yeah, of course.
I'm gonna look for that on YouTube later tonight.
Yeah, you should.
Well, that is your Murray Moment. What do we got coming up next episode? Oh, did you have any final thoughts on A Fish Called Wanda? I feel like we covered everything.
Man, we sure did cover a lot this time. Man, other than John Cleese is kind of brilliant.
Yeah, it's kind of made me, I will say on Netflix currently, they have a lot of Monty Python and some Faulty Towers, which I was unfamiliar with. So I've been trying to slowly get into some of that. The Monty Python stuff was never something that I was like clung to when I was younger, but I'm finding I appreciate it a little bit more now as an adult.
I was just going to say the same thing. I felt like when I watched it when I was younger that I should have gotten why everyone else was laughing around me. But now when I watch it as an adult, I'm like, oh man, this humor was so beyond me. But I get it now. It's totally funny.
I grew up early in high school with a couple of Monty Python heads, and I think that they were just they just nerded out on it too much. It made me because I couldn't quite get into it. It made me maybe despise it more. I don't know, but I'm learning. I'm learning to love it.
That really happens.
Learning to love it.
That happens sometimes.
Next episode we have coming up is our 1-year anniversary show.
Oh my god!
And
we've got something special planned.
Something special. I think we're gonna leave that a surprise.
Yeah. We know what we're gonna do. We just gotta do it.
It won't be a surprise if you follow us on social media, because we'll probably start dropping some information about that on Instagram. Don't Push Pause Podcast. Facebook, Don't Push Pause Podcast.
We're on Twitter. It's if you're on Twitter, please follow us, because I really don't know what I'm doing.
I know you handle our Twitter stuff.
I mean,
you really handle most all of our social media stuff.
I got a good handle on Instagram. Yeah. I got a decent handle on Facebook. Twitter, I don't really know what I'm doing. So please follow us. Just find us, Don't Push Pause, please.
Yeah. Well, if you want to contact us directly, Don't Push Pause Podcast at gmail.com. We will usually answer any question you have that's, within the realm of social acceptability. So until next time, I'm Justin Johnson.
And I'm Lindsay Reaper.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.